Operation Blackwind is the latest dataset for Infinity, and if you want to get into the game, this is probably one of the best starting points. But if you are coming from certain other games or you are completely new to miniature painting, these super detailed sculpts of metal minis can be a little bit daunting to paint. So in this video I'm going to be painting one of the factions, so all 7 models in roughly 7 hours to a reasonable standard, meaning that it's going to be doable but still quite pretty. And if you follow this step-by-step guide, you will also be able to feel the fully painted force on the tabletop, or if you're like me, more like in the display case. Hey guys, I'm Zoltan and you're watching Phalanx Miniatures. After priming all the models black, I apply a zenithal highlight by using Vallejo white. If you don't have an airbrush, you can achieve a similar result by using a white rattle can and spraying from above. The zenithal highlight will make sure that the paint we apply on top of it will be vibrant and cover easily, but the darker shadows it leaves behind will create some subtle transitions in the base coat and add some depth to the details. Since the brownish yellow desert color is the most dominant one in this scheme, I decided to simply spray it on by airbrush using a roughly 50-50 mix of Japanese brown and whole red. You can do this by hand of course, but using the airbrush will result in thinner coats which will preserve our zenithal highlights underneath way better. Alternatively, you can also apply a similar color through a rattle can. For the rest of the process, I switched over to a normal brush and started applying all the base colors for all the other elements on the models. I used AK Interactive Medium Olive for all the green things, making sure that I achieve a full coverage, especially on the parts that were covered by the white zenithal highlight. In the shadow areas, it is fine if the black undercoat shines through a bit. Once I was done, I immediately shaded all the green parts using Vallejo Express Color Plague Green, but you can also use a Citadel Green contrast paint if that is what you have at hand. I prefer using contrast paints to normal washes, since a normal wash will make everything uniformly darker and duller. Contrast paints will make everything a bit more colorful and vibrant while also shading the recesses. For base coating all the gray elements, I used AK Interactive Burnt Umber and decided to leave this without any shading since it is such a dark color anyway. However, I went back and shaded the original sand-colored armor and robes with Raglan Flash shades, and yes, I know that I just said that I prefer contrast paints over shades, but I can't help it. Flash shade is the best of all the Citadel shade paints, and it was the perfect tone for making the armor both darker and warmer, so I just went with it. And with that, I was done with all the main colors, and this is how they look after this stage. In the other game, technically this would be tabletop ready, I guess, since we have at least 3 colors on the models, but we can do better than this, so let's work on the details. One of the things I like the most about Infinity Minis is that they are super detailed without having a million different knickknacks on them, so this will be fairly easy. I painted all the helmet visors with AK Interactive Dark Rust. The hair for the models without a helmet and with actual hair received some medium rust from AK Interactive and then a wash with Gryph-hound Orange contrast. The exposed faces got a dark undercoat of whole red, no shading needed at this stage. Then I had to figure out how I should paint the patterns some of these guys have on their robes. Believe it or not, these patterns are actually sculpted onto the minis with super sharp and pretty deep recesses, so here's the trick that I used. I mixed some flow improver with Vallejo white, maybe a bit more flow improver than paint. Then I simply brushed it on without too much care so that I don't hit the raised parts of the robe. Thanks to the flow improver, the large majority of the paint should magically flow into the details, and the rest you can simply wipe away after, since the flow improver also increases the drying time. Once the white had dried, I mixed up flow improver with grass green from AK and repeated the previous process. Make sure that you wait until the white is completely dry though, otherwise the white and the green will mix and it will look like a mess. Looking back, I could have probably used the green that is a bit darker and closer to the original green on the armor to create a bit more contrast, but oh well, there is always a next time. With that, all the colors are on the minis and it is time for some highlighting. I used medium sand as my first highlight for the sand-colored armor and ropes, and I used it to outline every detail on the armor. Wherever I could, I created edge highlights, but even where there is no obvious edge, I created lines to separate the armor and the ropes from other elements, taking care to leave the dark lines between the two. It is okay to make these highlights a bit thicker since some of them will be covered by the next highlight color. If you hate doing edge highlights, you can make your life a bit easier by only concentrating on edges and elements around the upper body and the head, but I think it's worth the effort to apply at least the first highlight around the whole model. Then I went in with dark sand as my second highlight and used it only around the most prominent parts of the model, concentrating on the upper facing edges and trying to be as precise and thin as I can be without spending a lot of time on a single model. By the way, if you're wondering why I use medium sand first and dark sand after, for some reason AK Interactive decided that medium should be the darker color and dark should be the brighter color. It's not confusing at all. After that, I repeated the same process for all the other main elements as well, applying the first highlight around the whole model and concentrating the second lighter highlight only on the most prominent areas and mostly on the upper facing edges. I used olive green as the first highlight for everything green and switched to the lighter frog green for the second highlight. For everything grey, I used reddish grey from AK as a single highlight since I want to keep these parts a bit darker and less conspicuous. I highlighted the hair first with a mix of medium rust and light rust and switched to pure light rust for the final highlights. I used the same combination on the visor, first outlining them fully and then creating a harsh highlight in the middle, making it look like a light reflection. I went for a very simple but punchy non-metallic on these guys since I didn't want to go over the arbitrary 7 hours limit I set for myself for completing them. I made sure that everything that is supposed to be metallic is fully black, then I started highlighting every edge with French blue from AK. French blue is the perfect blend of bluish grey for non-metallic steel in my experience. I made sure that I highlighted every single edge, and wherever I had more surface to work with, like on the swords, I also started on a basic highlight inside those lines. Then I added some white to the French blue. With this lighter color, I highlighted around 50% of the edges, mostly concentrating on the upper facing ones. I added even more white into the mix and restricted my highlights to only 50% of what I highlighted with the previous mix. Finally, with pure white, I highlighted only a couple of really prominent edges and created a couple of bright spots on others by painting on a couple of small dots here and there with some thicker paint. Definitely not the best non-metallic you can do, but it gets the job done and makes the metallic elements stand out on the table. The faces are the bane of my existence, especially tiny ones like these. First, I mixed some orange-brown with whole red and started highlighting all the important parts of the face like the forehead, brows, cheeks, nose and the upper lip. Then I switched to medium flesh and dark flesh to highlight further. When I try to do this fast, like in this case, I usually end up with something that has way too much contrast and looks a bit like a ghoul at this point. Then it is time to glaze in some more highlights and smooth everything out. The trick that works for me is to have much less shadow around the face than what I initially thought would be good, and in general much less than on other elements of the model. With that I was nearly done and all I needed was to finish the bases. When I did the zenithal and the main sand color through the airbrush, I also created a nice natural highlight on the bases. I gave it some color and shading by using Agarose Dunes Citadel contrast, simply covering everything with it. Then I added a pinch of orange oxide dry pigment from Greenstop World and I was done. I painted the base rims black and called it a day. And the end result after 7 hours of painting looks like this. If you guys found the video useful and you want me to paint the other half of the box as well, please let me know in the comments below. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, of course, and see you in the next one.